Can a perfectionistic parent actually start to unlearn perfectionism?
Yeah, I think so. Like, there's a few things that I think about with this question, and sometimes I think that it might sound contradictory, but I think sometimes a parent could be perfectionistic without being without being high in perfectionism, if that makes sense. So, like, they could engage in behaviors that are perfectionistic, but from more of uh, a way it's not driven by who they are deep down, is a well entrenched part of who they are, but they just do it because they think that these are the behaviors that are needed in sport. So they find themselves jumping on the bandwagon of shouting, come on, you've got to reach this standard, and oh, come on, that was terrible. And just because they learn that sport and parents behave that way. So in which case it could be a very easy switch where you just sort of reflect upon and learn about that sport maybe shouldn't be that way, or that you as a parent maybe shouldn't be that way, and therefore could be an easy switch in terms of, oh, actually I should maybe avoid saying that to my child. I should avoid the shoulds, the musts, and so on that we talked about earlier. So it could be really simple if it's not well entrenched. Maybe it's just something that you need to be aware of more, and therefore think about the way that you behave around your children. So it could be quite simple. And if it is more well entrenched as part of who you are and the standards you set for others, um, then it could be harder to change. But there's lots of evidence from sport and other contexts that we can manage our perfectionism. We can, you mentioned before about self-compassion. You talked about writing the message to yourself about saying it's okay with this, and there's evidence of self-compassionate based interventions could be important, but there's evidence of mindfulness based approaches that could be effective in sport, acceptance commitment therapies, CBT. The list goes on and on and on. So there are definitely avenues out there whereby parents could learn or unlearn how to avoid setting the same unrealistic standards of others. So it would take some work, but there's definitely things that could be done.
Yeah, the unlearning of perfectionism for me has come definitely from a much more mindful approach. It's come from bit of therapy that maybe later on, but definitely mindfulness has been a big thing for me. It's just the ability for, like I mentioned with shooting all over yourself, that the moment I mentioned that word, being comfortable with having an awkward interaction with someone that would be, sorry, Michael, I didn't mean to say that word. I actually didn't mean should I mean could. And you have to change yourself. And I always I almost think of it in, if I don't change that, if I don't actively do that, and I succumb to the pressure of just wanting to get the conversation done, but at the risk of me not changing the behavior that I know is not going to be adaptive for myself, then I have just let that moment slip by, and that was a really great opportunity, an opportunity to change that. And it only takes a few moments. It only takes, it's almost, you can feel yourself about to say the word, and then you go could rather than should. And I just think that for me was built off the capacity to notice where my mind was, notice where my attention was, notice what was about to happen, be a little bit slower in my ability to articulate what I was about to say, not to reduce the cadence of a conversation, but just to say the right thing, knowing that it was going to have a positive outcome. We've just very quickly, what are the risks of a parent not changing their perfectionistic tendencies?
Yeah, so I think we've very briefly touched earlier on some of the potential outcomes of this type of high pressure, highly perfectionistic, professionalized sort of worldview and behaviors in sport, and they included burnouts. I think that's something that's been looked at before, where your child might be more likely or more vulnerable to become exhausted as a consequence of their sporting participation, more likely to um, sort of devalue their sport participation, so become more cynical towards sport in terms of what's the point? My time would be better spent elsewhere doing some different activity where you as a parent might not be involved, for example. It could lead to just reduced confidence in sport. So, a reduced sense of competence, more specifically, I guess, where you just no longer feel you're good enough in sport, which is never a good thing. It could lead to dropout beyond that, where you just decide sport is no longer for me. I'm going to drop out and I'm going to do something completely different, which is never a good thing. So if you want to reach the upper echelons of sport, thinking about dropping out is never nice. Never going to be a part of that journey. But more broadly, it's not good from a lifelong participation perspective. I'm somebody who's never reached the higher levels of sport, but I've consistently and happily played sport every week since I've been about 9. So I'd like to think that comes from perhaps the role my parents played in terms of they were consistently warm with me and happy with me, irrespective of how well I played. I've had times when I've uh, performed poorly. I've had times when I've maybe had the potential to go on to reach higher levels and never quite made it, and nothing ever changed. So that might have played a role in the fact that I still continue to and will continue to play sport at a Sunday league level, where I get kicked in the shins every week, but will do it because I love sport. So perhaps if parents are more perfectionistic and they don't unlearn that, you could jeopardize that sort of lifelong love of sport, which I think is never a good thing. Um, we mentioned injuries, but what I want to touch upon now, I guess, is the more obvious but concerning issue, which is it could lead your child to become extremely perfectionistic. So, if you are, it's a good chance that your child will internalize that pressure and it will form part of their personality. So, when we're growing up, children's personality is very malleable. It's when it's developed and formed and shaped and put into place. And if you become highly perfectionistic as an athlete, you then are potentially vulnerable to the whole host of outcomes that come with perfectionism. So, we know now, based on 30 years of research in sport, that typically it's linked with negative outcomes, and the net outcome of being perfectionistic is, for the most part, negative. There are, of course, exceptions to the rule. We know from by autobiographies and the like that there are tennis players, rugby players, swimmers out there who admit to being self-identified perfectionists, but these are the exceptions to the rule, I would argue, where they've managed to be successful, for other factors, not successful because of their perfectionism. And I know you've discussed this elsewhere or in another episode, so I'm not going into too much detail there, but um, yeah, like I think you run the risk of your child becoming perfectionistic, which could carry a whole host of negative outcomes for your child as well.
If you enjoyed that clip of the show, then YouTube has put together one of the best videos that you should be watching next. I have no idea what it is, but it is right here.